I'm going to start talking about the scales, because you have to start with the scale, because everything that you're going to learn about music theory or playing chords or playing licks, it's like without the scale, none of it makes sense. You can't understand any of it. So you have to start with the scale. And how many people spend time actually practicing scales on the guitar? So I'm playing C major right now. And for those of you who've done this before on piano, you probably learned that you cross under your third finger. Technique is important. You know, having the right fingering so that I can go up and play 2 octaves of the same scale. And then I could go to D. So there's a pattern to this. You have a starting note, and then whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And an easy way to remember that is just think of the visual image of the keyboard. You have 2 black keys, and then you have 3 black keys, and then you have that little gap between the set of 2 black keys and a set of 3 black keys. That gap in between are the 2 half steps of the scale pattern. Like, so when you see those 2 black keys together, that's 2 whole steps in between the first note to the second note, there's a whole step, and there's a black key in between. Second note to the third note of the scale, there's a black key in between. I'm talking about C major scale. And then you see that, hey, there's no black key, that's the half step. And then you see 3 black keys, there's 3 whole steps. And then the last half step to complete the octave. So starting note, whole, half, whole, half. And it's like the keyboard gives you a visual image of that whole step, half step pattern when you see the black keys and the white keys. And so if you can just memorize that pattern, you can pick any starting note and figure out the major scale. Like I just started on A flat, and I'm going to think whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And I just played A flat major just by remembering the pattern. So you have to develop a muscle memory for playing the scale and understanding the scale pattern. So that's C major. Here's D major and E major. And you just develop a memory for it. It's important. And so, you probably heard about such a thing as relative minor. And we need to talk about that. What does it mean to play in a minor key? What is the relative minor? Every major scale has a relative minor. And the way you can figure it out real easy is the 6th note of the major scale is the relative minor for that major key. So in the case of C major, C, D, E, F, G, A is the 6th note. Therefore, A minor is the relative minor of C major. And so I could play the same scale pattern starting on A. Now I'm playing A minor. It's the same notes as C major, but I just back up and start on A. Now it's A minor. So the whole step, half step pattern obviously changes at that point. When I told you to memorize 2 whole steps, half step, 3 whole steps, and a half step, that's the major scale. If you want to play minor, you back up 2 notes, 7, 6, and start on the 6th note. What's that?
Back up 2 notes.
Well, I was just, you could count forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and end up on A, or you could just go backwards 2 notes. And you're on A. For guitar players, that's really easy, because on the string, you just go down 3 frets, and you're on the relative minor, so from the root note. And then it's the same scale pattern, but you just start with that note, exact same notes, but now you're playing A minor instead of C major. That's why when you're reading a piece of music, C major has no sharps or flats in the key signature, and so does A minor. It's the relative minor because it's the same scale, so naturally it's going to have the same key signature. No sharps or flats. But if I go to G major, it has an F sharp in it, so you'll see that F sharp in the key signature. So G major has 1 sharp. Well, what would be the relative minor? The 6th note, remember? So G, A, B, C, D, E. So E minor is going to be the relative minor to G major. So I play the same scale pattern, starting on E, and I'm playing E minor. And so if you're reading a piece of music, if it's in E minor, you'll still see that F sharp in the key signature, because it's the same thing as G major. You're just calling a different note your starting note. This is all left over from an ancient system that goes way back to musicians in the ancient world, where they played the same series of whole steps and half steps, but they started on a different spot. So if I wanted to play the G major, but what if I want to start on A, which is the second note of G major? It's going to sound like this. It's weird. We don't write music like that because that's the Dorian mode. Or if I wanted to start on the third note, we don't write music like that in modern, Western culture. They still use that scale in the Middle East. It's the Phrygian scale. And that's why stuff from the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, places like that, sounds like that, because it's the same scale as our G major. You just start on B, and it's actually the Phrygian mode. So that since there's 7 notes, there's actually 7 starting places. But you don't need to know all of that. I'm just kind of explaining to you the history of why we have a relative minor in the first place. It's because of all 7 modes of this pattern, 7 different possible starting notes of one pattern. Of all 7 of them, somewhere hundreds of years ago in Western culture, we decided we don't like 5 of them and we only like 2 of them, and we kept those 2 and called them major and minor. And threw the other 5 out. But in other places in the world, they still use those other 5. But that's why we have such a thing as a relative minor in the first place. So there's G major, and there's E minor, same scale pattern. So for every major scale, it has a relative minor, and it's always the 6th note of the major scale that tells you what the relative minor is. So you should study that further and learn about modifications to the minor scale, like harmonic minor and melodic minor, but we don't want to go into that for today. But you could look all of that up. They took the minor scale, they just couldn't leave it alone, and they had to change it, and they made these little changes to it, and there's one called a harmonic minor, and there's another called a melodic minor. But let's not talk about that for the purposes of what we're doing today. Just the natural minor scale that's just like its relative major scale. Does that make sense? So, after you spend a lot of time playing scales, you get really good at it. Well, for a piano player, what I just did there using the correct fingering, I'm getting technique training out of that, but I'm also getting the benefit of some theory by understanding the scale pattern, so it's a 2-for-1 deal. If you study it and play it correctly, you're training your fingers to work the way they're supposed to on a keyboard, so you're getting technique training, but you're also reinforcing that scale pattern in your brain, and you're understanding music theory by just remembering the scale pattern. So it's a 2-for-1 deal. There's lots of reasons why you need to practice the major scale pattern. So from that scale, we can come up with chords. So when you hear people talking about the 1st or the 3rd or the 5th or the 7th or the 9th, we're talking about individual notes from the scale pattern that we can make chords out of. So a major chord is just the 1st and the 3rd and the 5th note of the major scale. And you've got that on that sheet in front of you. So, in the case of G major, it would be G and B and D. So you just take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th, got yourself a major chord. If I move up the scale, my next possible chord is going to be A and C and E. I just moved over in the scale pattern. It's actually the 2nd and the 4th and the 6th note of the scale. But it's a chord in and of itself. And since the root note of the chord is A, it's some type of A chord, and it turns out it's A minor. Right? And then if I move up again, the next available notes in G major is B, D, and F sharp. And that's a B minor. It's the 3rd chord that I can make from the scale. If I move up again, I've got C, E, and G. It's a chord built on C. It's C major, and it's the 4th, 2, 3, 4. It's the 4th note of the scale. So therefore, this is the 4 chord, Roman numeral 4 chord. And so that's how chords are made. They're made from notes of the scale as you walk up the scale. Since there's 7 notes in the scale, there's 7 chords that you can build off of those 7 root notes. So we call chords by Roman numerals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and here we are starting over again, an octave higher. So 7 notes, 7 chords. And the 1st chord in the scale is always major. The 2nd chord is minor. The 3rd chord is minor. This is the scale pattern that's dictating this to me. instead of major, it can't be major, it has to be minor because D sharp's not in the scale. So my B chord in the key of G has to be minor. That's my 3 chord. So major, minor, minor, major, major, minor. The 7 chord is diminished. It's a different thing altogether. So if I played F sharp major, it would sound like that. But these 2 notes aren't in the scale, so I have to flat the A sharp down to A and the C sharp down to C just to fit this scale pattern. And when you flat the 3rd and you flat the 5th, that's a diminished triad. So it's the scale pattern dictating that the 7th chord has to be diminished. So that's where we get these chords from, and that's why chord number 1 and 4 and 5 are the 3 major chords, because the scale says so. It's kind of like playing Simon Says or something. The scale says. So 1, 4, and 5 are major, 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and 7 is diminished. And to tell you the truth, if you're not playing a jazz chart or some complicated classical piece, you're probably not going to ever see a diminished chord in modern worship music. We're going to have lots of 1, 4, and 5, and lots of 6. Maybe a 2 chord and a 3 chord here and there every once in a while, but no 7 diminished chord. So there we go. So the simplest chord progressions probably just use 1 and 4 and 5, and that's a pretty common thing that everybody's heard before. 1 and 4 and 5, and if you're playing blues, the 1 chord, and then go to the 4 chord, back to the 1, and then the 5, 4, 1. So blues, simple forms of music are all based on just using those 3 major chords, the 1, the 4, and the 5. If I go over to C major, then my 1, 4, and 5 are C, F, and G, right? And so those chords get used a lot. I mean, we played a song this morning in worship that was C and F and C and F several times. It was back and forth between just those 2 chords, 1 and 4. And so after that, the next most commonly used chord is the 6 chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 chord. So in the case of C major, that's A minor. So listen to the sound of this. Here's a 1 chord going to a 5 chord, and then there's the 6 chord coming down to a 4 chord. How many songs sound like that? 1, 5, 6, 4. Hundreds of songs go 1, 5, 6, 4. Very common chord progression. In the key of G, it's going to sound like this. G is 1, D is 5, E minor is 6, and C is 4. So 1, 5, 6, 4. Or how about 1, 6, 4, 5? Very common chord progression. 1, 6, 4, 5. Another. So those obviously get used a lot. 1, 4, and 5, and then you add the 6 to it. And those 4 chords, hundreds of songs are made up of just those 4 chords. So the 2 chord, so I'm back in the key of C. The 2 chord gets used next most often, and sometimes you'll hear it instead of a minor, sometimes it'll appear major. It just broke the key signature, but it sounds cool going here. But there are chords sometimes that break the key signature. A chord that should be minor according to the scale appears major. Or a chord that should be major according to the scale appears minor in the song in one spot. So it's breaking the rules or something, right? It's violating the key signature. But this is not laws of physics. It's just music and it's art. So you can do that. It's okay. But you have to start with the scale to understand how all this fits together. So a very common way of breaking the key signature is to play a 2 major chord. And might lead you over to the G, the 5, back to the 1 chord. So another really cool way of breaking the key signature is to take your 4 chord that should be major and all of a sudden play it minor on your way back to the 1 chord. You've probably heard songs that do that. You're playing along on a song. It's a really cool song. Here's a 6, 5, 4, and then all of a sudden you hear that 4 minor back to the 1. So it broke the key signature, but did you like it? It sounded cool, so it's okay to break the key signature. So, and I think the reason we like that 4 minor is because it has a chromatic movement. This note in my 4 chord, that A, the middle note of my F chord, when I make it minor, it goes down to A flat. So that's chromatic movement, half step. And it naturally walks into that note, which is the 5th note of the C chord, the 1 chord. So the chromatic movement, I think, is what makes it appealing to our ear, to hear that 4 minor. So we couldn't play all of those chords and figure all of that out unless we first went back and learned the scale pattern and how it works and how the chords come from the scale pattern. Right? And so it all starts with the scale. So as piano players, though, you have to spend time on this. You have to take these chords and invert them. So when I say invert them, if I'm playing a C chord with the C on the bottom, and then the E is the 3rd, and then the G is the 5th note, and so my C is the bottom note. When you start out learning, you play chords with that root note on the bottom. We call that root position. But you can't stay there. You've got to invert it up here. 3rd note, 5th note, root's now on top. Invert it again, 5th, root note's in the middle, and the 3rd's on top. You can't just stay there in root position. You have to practice playing that chord all over the piano. So as I look at the keyboard, I'm envisioning the C chord all across the piano, and I can find it anywhere on the key. So you have to spend time doing that to develop the muscle memory for that. So a good thing to do is just sit here and invert chords. It's really annoying to people around you. You're not playing something that sounds very musical, but you're developing a muscle memory for how to invert the chord, right? And you just have to do that. You have to put the time into it. There's my G chord, and I'm inverting it back and forth, getting used to finding it anywhere on the keyboard in any position. Another thing you should spend time practicing that will help you with these inversions is a 1-octave arpeggio. So here's my C, and with my 2nd finger I'm going to play the E, and with my 3rd finger the G, and then I'm going to play the octave on top with my 5th finger. So we're about to all do this here in a few minutes. Everybody's going to get up here and do this. So, and some of y'all have already practiced this, but we're going to do it together just to make sure we're all on the same page. So 1-octave arpeggio, go up and down that chord, take any chord. And that helps you start to visualize it across multiple octaves. You can even cross under and go up to the next octave and come back down to 2-octave arpeggio. And as piano players, you should spend a lot of time doing 2-octave arpeggios like that. It not only, once again, you're getting some technique training, you're learning how to use your fingers on the keyboard by practicing that, but you're also developing muscle memory and visualizing the chord across multiple octaves on the keyboard. So when you go to play something, you can spot that chord anywhere, and you can just go to it without even thinking about it, because you put all these hours into spending time doing that. I'm inverting the chord. Oh, now I'm practicing my arpeggio. I've done this for hours and hours, and now I can find that F chord anywhere without even thinking about it, because you put all that time into it. So that's the kind of things that piano players are supposed to be practicing. Your scales, your chord inversions, and your arpeggios. Those are the fundamentals that help you do all these other things that we're going to talk about. So I think that we should probably take some time to do that. You guys want to come up here and play inversions and arpeggios for a minute? Let's all do that and see how that goes. Here's a neat little trick that you can use to add to your use of chords as you improvise and as you play charts, come up with little ear candy moments in between vocal lines and things. You can, in addition to having your major triad, 1, 3rd, and 5th, you can add this note, which you could call the 2nd, because it's obviously the 2nd note of the scale, but let's call it a 9th, because we have a 1, a 3rd, and a 5th, and anything else that we add to the chord is going to have to be a number above 5. And so we're going to call it a ninth even though we're playing it down here in this octave. So when I add that second note of the scale to my major triad, it's a ninth. So I'm going to play this G chord and play it with the added ninth and then arpeggiate that chord and listen to what that sounds like. It's a nice little thing that you can use. Here's a C chord with an added ninth. Nice little things that you can do with ninths as your, ear candy or whatever, adding little things. So let's say the chart is, a G, E minor, a D, throw the ninth in there, C, I'm going to throw the ninth in there. So with every one of those chords, every one of those major triads, by the way, I was adding that extra ninth in there. And here's a cool thing. I can think of that one chord with my added ninth, and I can play it in this inversion, okay, where I have the fifth on either end, and the root note right here in the middle, and my ninth there. I'm not really adding the third. I'm going to save that for later. I've just got a root note and then an octave fifth and then the ninth or the second, and I can arpeggiate that. Put my G bass underneath it. Now here's the really cool thing. I can stay right there on those notes, and even though I go to the E minor, still stay right there on those notes. I go to the D, still fits. C. It'll get old after a while, but it's a nice little trick you can use. Just something extra you can use. So now let's all experiment using ninths. Let's take our major triads and see what it's like to add this extra fourth note to the chord. We'll call it the ninth. Let's experiment with that for a while. So we played some ninths, and we were just talking about this, a couple of us, about, well, what if I just have a G and an A and a D, and I'm playing the first note and the second note and the fifth note, and I don't have that third in there. Well, that's on your page too. It's a 3-note chord. It's technically a triad, so we call it a G2 or a G suspended second. A G. You'll see this on charts all the time. The guitar players generally don't, I'm not picking on guitar players, I'm just saying they generally don't make this distinction between a second or a ninth. It's all the same to them, because as you play a chord on the guitar, you don't necessarily have all of these notes available to you as easily as a keyboard player has all these notes available. And so if I were to play a G ninth as a piano player, I'm thinking it's a G major triad with that second or ninth added to the triad, a 4-note chord. And it's not just a G2 without the third. Is that making sense? 1, 2, and 5, or 1, 2, 3, and 5. Now I have to call that a ninth. This is all technical theory stuff. So, well, it's, but I'm not playing it up there. I'm playing it down here in this octave. So the second and the ninth are the same note. So why do we call one a G2 and the other one a G9 chord, for example, or a C2 and a C9? And the difference is it's a ninth when you have the triad and you're adding the note into the triad. But it's a 2 when you only have those 3 notes, the first, the second, and the fifth, and you don't have the third. Now we're talking about a modified triad. But it doesn't, I mean, that's a technical thing that's good to know, but when you're reading charts, it really doesn't matter. If you see G2, D2, A2, whatever it is on the page, and you throw the third in there, it's okay. It's like not a big deal. It's, if you went to your college theory class, you would, one version of it's a ninth, the other version of it is a suspended second. But guitar players call them all twos, generally. Piano players generally tend to call them all ninths. It's just a thing. Just wanted you to know what that means. And so if the guitar player is playing a G2 and I'm the piano player, I still might throw that third in there. It's not going to conflict with anything. It's no big deal. Still going to sound good. So how to use all this stuff, how to use this word in a sentence, how to use this stuff in a song. You know, let's apply some of these things. So what I did was I picked 4 styles of music, and I recorded bass and guitar and drums, and I picked an easy chord progression, that one that we were talking about, 1, 5, 6, 4, and I'm playing it in the key of G. And so how do we use what we just learned about chords to fill in our role as a keyboard player in the band? How are we supposed to fit in? Well, it depends on the style of music that we're playing. So are you ready to play that CD? Here's 1, 5, 6, 4, and G according to one style of music. As soon as we might need to play it at a certain volume. Okay, that's probably good. Where's the 1 chord? Okay, that's 6, that's 4. So here's 1 right here. 1, 5, 6, 4. Playing the chords, and I'm using ninths. I used a ninth there. Ninth. There's my 6th chord, E minor. I'll walk down to the C and through the ninth in. So now I'm going to get more complicated using all of those things. It depends. If you're doing all of that while somebody's singing, that would be a little too much, right? But yeah, if we've got 4 bars or 8 bars before the vocals come in, and maybe I'll throw in a few things like that. The rest of the time I might just be going, waiting. I don't want to interfere with the vocal line. I'm just going to be real simple and clean about it. Maybe I'll go, ooh, is that too much? Was I in the way? You're always kind of worrying about, oh, I hear the guitar player doing something, and if I go, is that getting in the way? Or the vocals is singing something, so maybe I shouldn't do that because it might get in the way. But you could do those things if it's a little hole, like I'm singing something, now I have 2 beats of not singing, and then the next vocal line comes in, you get those little holes in between the vocal lines. You can maybe throw in a little thing like that, G, and then just a little thing. Not too much. Hole in the vocal, and then the vocal comes back in. So you're just making sure that when you do that, you're not interfering with anything else that's going on around you. I'm attacking the chord on the correct beat. I'm changing the chord with the rest of the band on the right beat. And I've got these licks using ninths available to me, but I don't want to play too much and interfere with a guitar line, a vocal line, or wow, wouldn't it be cool if we had a violin or a trumpet or a saxophone or something? They might be doing something interesting, and I don't want to interfere with them. So anyway, what style would we call that? It sounds like generic, modern worship, 101 style of music. It was real basic. Here's my 1, 5, 6, 4 chord. But now I'm going to take those same chords in the same key and play something that sounds a little different. And let's see how we would fit with that. Can you play track 2? It's the same chords. There's the 1, there's the 5, here's the 6, and here comes the 4 chord. And I've got a piano. How do I fit in with that? You know, I could just play the chords, right? Again, I want to play something a little more interesting than that. So it's not going to sound like what I played before, though. Rhythm is obviously part of the groove. Maybe I want to just be part of that, so I'm not interfering with anything. Throwing a little something. So to match the groove, I want to capture some of that rhythm. That was a little bit more driving rock kind of a groove. So actually, to tell you the truth, I could do more on a B3 organ with that would fit in than I would with a piano sound. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, how to use the B3 organ and how it's so different from what you would do on a piano. So my preferred instrument on a groove like that would be the B3 organ sound. But if I had to, I could just punch that rhythm, you know, with the bass player and the drummer. Just hold that down. But if I needed to, maybe throw in a little something. By the way, that lick is a little different than just using the ninth. We're going to talk about what that is. It's a different scale. I left the major scale behind when I'm playing that lick. I'm using a blues scale. And so, but I want to cover the blues scale here in a little bit, not right now. So what is the next style of music that I have on there, track 3? Something different. I can't even remember. Oh, now I remember what it is. Now I got to think country. So obviously the groove would be that. Pretty simple. The bass is on the downbeat, and the chord in my right hand is on the upbeat with the snare drum and the kit. And my bass notes are going to be 1 and 5. 1 and 5 of the chord. 1, 5. D chord. 1 and 5 for the 6 chord, and 1 and 5 for the 4 chord. And then I throw the chord on top of that. Basic country groove. A lot of those licks we're using the ninth, by the way. That lick, that's kind of a classic country player thing to do. We were talking about the ninth right there. Well, what if I invert the chord up and I throw in the 6? And so now I'm using the 9th and the 6th, or otherwise known as the 13th, but it sounds very country when you do it that way. So something else to do. So either you can play simple, or as you get better with chord inversions and using little extra notes like the ninth, you can throw in licks, or you can just stay home and just do something real just to match the groove. So what is the last one on there? It's a totally different groove. What do I do with this? Same chord progression. You could be real simple about that, because if you get too busy with the reggae groove, it messes it all up. I could play that guitar part. Just to match the groove. But the guitar player is already doing that. I could play maybe just a chord pad. Just hold the chord down. As soon as I start doing stuff like that, it doesn't sound reggae anymore. You know? That sounds more country or something. So I don't want to do that. So I'm kind of stuck with just pads or matching the guitar player on that rhythm. And probably I'd use a Fender Rhodes patch for that more than this acoustic piano patch. It'd probably sound better to use a Fender Rhodes. Get too busy with the reggae feel. The whole thing is about kind of understating things, being a little bit lazy about it, holding back on the beat. It's a little understated. No, let's not get too busy. I don't want to make that much of a big deal out of this. It's reggae. I'm going to be cool about it. Just throw in a little something, and that's all it needs, you know. So anyway, so those were 4 styles of music. But I'm using all of the same things that we just talked about to help me match the different styles. So I wanted to also talk about throwing filler in. You mentioned that earlier, and I hinted at it a little bit about playing what I'm calling filler, which means something other than holding the chords down on the right rhythm. Filler, throwing in a little lick or something, you know, something to make it more interesting, rather than just simply playing the chords on the right beat. And another word could be ear candy, just a little decorative thing on top. I like the term ear candy. It's just a little thing you can add in, makes it sound cool, so it's not so plain vanilla all the time. And so there's kind of some rules about that, and I was talking about that, how you don't want to do that where it interferes with anything else that's going on. And the primary thing you don't want to interfere with is the vocalist, obviously. The vocals need to be out front, and everything you do should support the vocals. And so if you get too busy, it makes it confusing for somebody who's listening to this. They're hearing the words, and they're focusing in on the singer singing the words, and then they hear this other stuff that's coming in, and it's kind of like clutter. It's messing it up. It sounds confusing. So you want to save those things for little holes in the vocal line. And then you've got to think about your fellow musicians. You know, there's maybe a guitar player. What if we have a saxophone player or somebody else that could also throw in little filler things, little riffs here and there? If you all did it at once, that would also be confusing. So we have to take turns. We have to play nice, right? And so if the guitar player, he's getting ready, he feels that hole coming up, he really wants to play this really cool riff that he figured out. And here it comes, and he goes to do it, and I throw in something. Well, that's kind of disappointing. So we have to look at each other and make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes. Hey, it's my turn now. You know, I'm going to play, oh, it's your turn now, you know. Just communicate in some way. When I was playing lots of country gigs, it was like there were these set rules. It was almost like the piano takes the first half of the second verse, and then the fiddle will take the second half. The guitar player got the whole first verse to himself because that's the way he is. But we had like these little rules that we kind of understood each other. So the second verse would come around, and I'd, throw in my little thing, in the vocal hole, and nobody was stepping on my toes. And then the second half of the verse, the fiddle would come in and do his thing, and I'd lay back and just let him do his thing, So we would get out of each other's way. And so you have to be cognizant of what's going on around you as you throw in something. And it's like, man, but I learned this really cool thing, and I want to show it to you. Well, maybe it's too much for that song in that moment, and you just need not be so busy. You may play something a little simpler that fits what's happening at that particular moment. So, otherwise known as play the song, not play this cool thing in your head, but play this song, what it needs right now. For this group of people in this moment with this singer, play that. It's cool that you figured out this other cool riff, but it wouldn't really help us right now. It's too much stuff. So you have to play what's appropriate and be situationally aware, cognizant of what's going on. Be a good team player as you throw in these riffs. Let's see. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the B3. So I'm going to step over here to this keyboard. Okay, speaking of B3, let's check out the B3. Now this is a Nord, and it's simulating an old Hammond B3 with a Leslie speaker cabinet. Sounds like that. Right, and then the Leslie speaker cabinet, you can speed up the rotation of the Leslie speaker in there. There it is faster. You can hear how it goes fast, and then it slows down. So what is that simulating? The Hammond B3 organ, which had real drawbars, not these buttons that I have here on the Nord simulating the drawbars, and then the Leslie speaker cabinet. So when Hammond invented this electronic organ way back in the beginning of the 1900s, he was hoping to provide churches with a cheap, easy way of getting a pipe organ sound, and without having to, pay for this expensive pipe organ. And so the Hammond B3 had a couple of keyboards, had some drawbars on top, even had some bass pedals. And somewhere along the way, another fellow named Leslie invented this speaker cabinet that goes with the Hammond B3, and it has a 15-inch woofer down in the bottom with some baffles on it, and it has a horn up on top that rotates. And you can hear this simulating the sound of that rotation. There it is on a slow rotation, and when I press the fast button, it speeds up. And that's simulating that rotary speaker speeding up as it circles around. And so Hammond never really liked Mr. Leslie, as it turned out. They could have really done some good business together, because after a while, all the jazz guys started kind of catching on to the sound of the Hammond B3 with that Leslie speaker. And that just became the sound that everybody wanted. And so later on in the 60s, the rockers got hold of it. And so you start hearing that B3 sound with the Leslie, and then sometimes they'll put some extra overdrive on it. I can distort it. Starting to get into Deep Purple sound there, right? Or I can turn that off and put a little vibrato on it. And now I've got the Steppenwolf sound. Right? And so the rockers got hold of this in the 60s and really found out all kinds of things they could do with the B3, with that Leslie speaker cabinet. But the real thing's a big piece of furniture, hard to carry around. This little keyboard weighs 26 pounds and does a pretty good job of simulating it. So now let's talk about how to use that sound in a song. So there's lots of times where you might want, I'm going to take that vibrato off. So I've got a straight organ tone with a little bit of a rotary. I've got a slow rotary on. So that, and I can bring out some high, hear that high drawbar that I just brought out? There's the high drawbars. Now if I start getting rid of some of the lower drawbars, sounds like that. But I want some of those lows in there. I'll bring them back. Okay, so I've got the highs up and the lows up, but I don't have too many mids on these drawbars. And I get that sound. Okay, so that might be a good sound for a verse. Just a single note with a slow rotary for a verse. Okay, the dynamics are pretty low. We're singing a verse. Oh, but here we're going to hit the chorus, so I'm going to kick it up to fast rotary, and maybe now play a big chord, and that's going to be better for the chorus of the song. Okay, but now we're going back to the verse, slow rotary, maybe a single note, little thing like that for the verse. So now let's try it on that track that we were jamming to earlier. I told you that I'd prefer to use a B3 sound on this more rockin' kind of track that we did. Remember, the chord progression is 1, 5, 6, 4, and there it is. So remember I was saying maybe you could just have a single tone for the verse, single note, slow rotary. Okay, but now let's say that we're kicking into the chorus. Kick that on fast. Big full chord for the chorus of the song. Okay, now we're going back to let's say we went back to the verse. Single note, kind of bring the dynamics down a little bit. Maybe 2 notes. Don't want to do too much. That might be a nice thing to do for the verse. Now here's what's going to happen when we kick into the chorus. I'm going to do this push where I push up. Opposite of what you would do on a piano. Fast rotary, push into that chord for the chorus. So that little push into, and notice when I played the 1 chord, I didn't play it up here in root position. I put the root note of the chord on top. That's a typical organ player thing to do. And so I'm kicking into the chorus, and I'm going to push into that chord with my root note on top. That's very typical of an organ player. So everything I did there is kind of opposite of a piano player. A piano player would gliss down, sounds stupid on an organ, right? And a piano player might play down here lower in root position. If I played this organ like it was a piano, it doesn't really work. It sounds kind of dumb. So everything you do on organ is kind of opposite of what you do on a piano. A single note up high. You've got that rotary to play with. I've got drawbars to mess with. Lots of different things that you can do with an organ. And so you end up approaching it differently than you would with a piano. So let's experiment with that B3 organ sound. Playing in G, this is Chris Tomlin's How Great Is Our God. 1, and then a 6, and then a 4, 5, back to 1, right? And so if I were to throw in blues licks on top of that, since I'm in the key of G, here's the trick to it. I'm actually thinking of the E blues scale. It's the relative minor to G. I go to the relative minor of the key that I'm in and play the blues scale from that. So I'm playing the E blues scale. And the blues scale is 1, minor third, 4, flat 5, 5, and flat 7. Now if I left out the flat 5, I'd be playing what's known as the minor pentatonic. E, G, A, B, D. That's E minor pentatonic. Now if I move over and I start on G and play the same notes, I'm playing G major pentatonic, because remember G major and E minor are relatives of each other, same key, same scale. And I'm throwing out 7 notes in the scale and throwing 2 out. I have a 5-note scale, hence the name pentatonic. And so that's the G major pentatonic. Or I could come over and play E minor pentatonic. It's the same notes, right? I'm just using a different one as I'm calling E1 instead of G1. But the thing about this scale, the minor pentatonic, is I can add this other note called a flat 5. That's where the blues sound comes from, is that flat 5 note. Back in the old days, that was the notes that your grandmother told you not to play because it was of the devil or something. Yeah. And that's why you have all these mythological things about the blue note. And you get places on the side of the road from the old days called the Blue Note Cafe or the Blue Note this, that, or the other thing. It's from that flat 5.
Well, that's the flat third.
It's a, well, but yeah, I'm thinking the actual blues scale: 1, minor third, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7. So it really is a flat 5, because if I was playing blues in E major, you know, I still would play the E blues scale with the minor third. Even though it has a major third in the chord, the guitar player is playing an E7 chord with a major third, and I'm still playing this note, the minor third, against it as I play. So that's the way blues is. It uses that scale, which has a minor third in it, even though you may be playing in a major key. It breaks all the rules. That's why it's blues. That's why rock came from it. But now I'm going to take all that forward to a modern worship song or a modern song of some type that's not really a blues song, and I'm going to still use that blues scale to play a little riff. So I'm playing G and E minor and C and D, and I know I'm in the key of G, but this works if you think of, I'm going to play the blues scale from the relative minor of the key that I'm in. So I'm thinking E blues scale. So as I play my G chord, I'm playing a little riff that comes right from that E blues scale. There's my E minor chord. There's my C chord. So it doesn't matter what chord I'm playing on. Anything I play from the E blues scale, the relative minor of the key I'm in, it's going to fit. Now, you wouldn't want to do that on Chris Tomlin's How Great Is Our God, because that would interfere with worship, but that's how you come up with riffs. It's like you can't hit a wrong note, just using the blues scale, otherwise known as the minor pentatonic with an extra note added, the blues note. Now the cool thing about that, you know, I'm in the key of G, and you're trying to figure out how to, gosh, I've got to spend time practicing this now. I told you to spend time practicing the major scale, which you should, but now I'm telling you, in order to do this, you got to practice going up and down the blues scale. But here's a real easy way to come up with that blues riff. I'm playing the 1 chord in root position. Here's a G major chord in root position. And I've got that note there with my 2nd finger. And then if I think of the 3rd finger as doing double duty on that note and this note, I automatically have most of that scale right under my fingertips as I play the 1 chord in root position. So now I can play even though I go to the E minor chord, I'm still playing the 1 chord in root position using those notes. I never moved my hand. I'm still playing a G chord in root position because most of the notes in the E blues scale are right there under your fingertips when you just stay on the 1 chord in root position. I just change the bass note, G chord, E minor chord, C chord. Now you'd want to eventually do something else that would get old after a while, but it's an easy way to start using notes from the blues scale, you know. And then you have to use them sparingly. You don't want to, you know, everybody's worshiping and then you're like freaking out on the blues scale. That would kind of be weird. You don't want to overuse it, but it's a cool thing to have in your toolbox to pull out every once in a while. If I was doing Casey Corum's song, what's the name of that song? Your Love Has Rescued Me is the name of that song. And it's a lot of E minor to A7. Well, it's just begging for some blues riffs. You know, you can't just, you know, ignore that. You've got to throw something in. You got to give it a little. So I'm in E minor, so I'm still going to use the E blues scale because I'm actually in E minor. would use it for G major, and I would also use it for E minor. So that's where you really would want to use some blues riffs. So I'm in the key of C. So which blues scale am I going to use if I'm in the key of C? A minor. There it is right there, the A blues scale. So I'm playing C and F. I think blues riffs in A minor. There's two chords. It's once again, C chord in root position. There's most of the notes from the blues scale right under my fingers when I play the one chord in root position. We've got some basic chords there. 4 chord is C, back to G, which is 1, A minor is 2, D is 5, and we just do that again. C is 4. See, that just wouldn't work on this song, to start playing blues riffs.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, it's kind of a little...
Oh, yeah, you're right. It changes the whole song.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want to do that on this song. I'd use a lot of ninths though. G9, A minor 7, and then a D9. I could use ninths. C9, G9, E minor 7, I'm sorry, A minor 7, D9. Good, good Father, till you are, till you are, till you are.